Back in 2014, before I even bought this property, I called the New York State Department of Health, the local Ulster County chapter of that, and I asked them if I could do rainwater catchment and not drill a well, and they said yes. So for the next year, basically, I was assuming I could do that. Then this year in 2015, I had my septic engineer out here looking at the property, and he said, I had already talked to him previously about not doing a well, but I guess he forgot, and he said, "Where are you putting your well?" And I said, "No, we talked about it, I'm not doing a well." And he goes, "Oh, I don't think that's going to be allowed." So I called the New York State Department of Health back, and they're telling me now that I cannot do rainwater catchment. I can do rainwater catchment, but only if I have a well into bedrock hooked up to the house first. That's the only way I'm going to get my certificate of occupancy for the house. I said, I talked to you guys last year. I did my due diligence. I have the guy's name I talked to and all my notes from the conversation. And I said, I bought this property with the assumption that I could do this. And it was kind of a big to-do. I made a stink about it because that's totally not cool. And turns out the guy that I spoke to no longer works for the Department of Health, and who knows, maybe he was just blowing smoke, maybe he just didn't know what he was talking about, I don't know. But the point is, lesson learned is that you got to get everything in writing. If I ever call any state department asking a question that's going to severely affect decisions I make, I'm going to ask them to send it to me in writing with a signature. And you should too, because things like this can happen. So, I know, it sucks. I can do rainwater catchment, but I got to drill a well first. And, I guess that's not the biggest deal in the world. It wouldn't hurt to have a well. I'd like to have it as a backup. That would be nice. The big problem is that it costs a lot of money. Anywhere between, there's different types of wells you can drill, or pound, I'll get to that. But, anywhere, until you get down to bedrock, it'd be anywhere between, $25 to $35 a foot to get down there. Down in bedrock, it can be anywhere between $15 and $25 a foot. And if your well is hundreds of feet deep, you can see how that adds up. So, not happy about that. Make a long story short here, I have no choice but to drill a well. So I started doing research. I'm trying to figure out, what the quality of the water is around here. So I started talking to my neighbors. I want to find out how deep people have to go. What I find out is that people are generally going in between 200 and 300 feet down before they hit water in my area. There are two types of wells that are made here. There's the old style, which is a cable machine, I believe it's called. It's pounding. So basically it's like a piston with a bit that's just like pounding and pounding and pounding the rock to break it up. And then it has like a vacuum it kind of creates, and it sucks all the debris up, and then it keeps going. It's very slow. And then the more common one around here nowadays is drilling. And the drill, basically rotary, it turns. It's like a hammer drill. It turns, and it uses pneumatics to basically it's like pounding and drilling simultaneously, and it's blowing compressed air and water down into the hole, and so it's making a slurry of all the stuff that's cutting up, and then the compressed air basically blows that slurry on the outsides of that drill and out the top of the hole. Now, there are pros and cons to both. Drilling is very fast. It takes a crew of 2 or 3 guys. They can get hundreds of feet deep in a single day. Pounding is very slow. It's a one-man operation, but it can literally, I think he's only getting like 20 to 30 feet a day. So it can take like a week or more to get it done. Pounding is a lot more expensive. On average, around $10 more per foot. The reason why I was considering pounding is because supposedly that pounding, that banging that it does, that like jackhammer effect, basically once it hits bedrock, it starts fracturing the rock nearby, kind of accessing veins of water that a rotary drill might just go right past, because the rotary drill isn't fracturing rock as much out to the sides. And that can be a really good thing because you can hit water faster without going as deep. But it's a gamble because you never know where you're going to really hit water. Which brings me to dowsing. I actually had a few people come out to the property, and one of the guys was a believer in dowsing. Now, if you, some of you may know what dowsing is. For those that you don't, basically it's taking two precariously balanced, like angled pieces of like sticks or pieces of metal. The guy that I saw do it used a little like little flag marking steel, like little teeny thin gauge tube steel. It has like a little bend in it, about yay long, and he put it between his fingers. And the idea is that you hold them kind of at a precarious balancing point, and then when they swing in towards each other, they've found something. Now, what you're looking for in the ground could literally be anything. Literally, people have used dowsing for finding water veins in bedrock, for finding minerals and gold, and you know, God knows what else. Pretty much, people have used it for finding anything in the ground. To me, I think it's witchcraft. I watched that guy. And literally, as he was walking, he literally put those sticks in his hand, and he's like, oh, I can feel it already. I feel him. And literally, he took a half step, and he moves his fingers that's holding the sticks, and like lifts up his elbows, and they cross together, and he says, you got water right here. Honestly, that's a crock. I can't buy that, man. I did more research on it, and the general consensus is that there is no proof whatsoever that it does anything. Now, in my mind, dowsing is something that you do because when it comes to, you know, finding something buried in the ground without like having some type of like, you know, scientific equipment or like sonar or, you know, God knows what, it's really just, you're guessing. You're guessing. I mean, you can make educated guesses based on like, I'm sure there's like geologists that can say, oh, the topography here and the features of the land, you know, most likely water will be here. You know, maybe that's possible, but generally, like these guys drilling wells and stuff, they don't know any of that stuff, and they're just guessing if anything else. So in my mind, dowsing is a way to give people like some peace of mind. I think some people need it because they're about to go embark on a really expensive like endeavor, and you could literally drill a well and hit a water vein at like, you know, 100 foot into bedrock, and then go 5 feet over to the left and drill the same hole and not hit it till 400 feet because you just missed that vein and you never hit another one. So in my mind, it's sheer coincidence. Now here's the good news, is that bedrock seems to be riddled with veins of water. So you just pick a place, you drill down, eventually, it's not like you're never gonna hit water, you're going to, because there's just so many veins of water in the bedrock. The question is, how quick are you going to hit it? So in my case, we hit it 300 feet deep from the surface. It took 160 feet to get down to bedrock, and then it was, you know, the rest of the way down to 300 feet, and we actually went another 25 feet to go below the water vein. And that's, you know, that's like, in my opinion, like for this area, a little bit on the high side. I was hoping to go, you know, under 300 feet. That's just not the way it worked out for me. So we did not douse. We hit water at 300, and it was relatively reasonable. There's the potential for a pounder to develop water sooner than a rotary, and that is because, like I said, that fracturing that kind of reaches out and grabs veins that you might have missed with a rotary. You might start accessing all these little veins on your way down, start developing water sooner than you would have with a rotary, and you might not have to go down quite as far. But there's a bunch of factors here. So little course on the way well drilling works. First, you got to go through your overburden. Your overburden is like the silt and the clay and the sand and the gravel that sits on top of bedrock. Basically, the earth is a big ball of rock. And then on top of that is a really thin layer of organic material, which is our dirt and our gravel and everything that, you know, we generally see on the ground. So in order to get through the overburden, you need to put in my case, 6-inch steel pipe casing through that. Because if you drill a hole into that, eventually it's just going to collapse in. So you need to have that pipe going down to keep all that overburden out of your hole. So you drill down, you stick your casing in, and then you get down to bedrock, and you basically drill that casing in to bedrock about 10 feet or so, and that gives you a good seal so that all your overburden can't get into that sealed connection between the bedrock and the casing. And then after you go that far, you don't need casing anymore. You just drill down through rock and in the bedrock, and your hole is not going to collapse because it's all rock. Casing is more expensive. In my case, I spent $16 a foot on the casing and $10 a foot on the drilling. So to get down to bedrock, it ends up being $26 a foot because you're drilling and you're putting casing in. And then after bedrock, it's just $10 a foot. So it took me 160 feet to get to bedrock. That is 160 feet of overburden that we had to go through. That was, again, more than everything was more than I was hoping with this. People around here generally, I see 80 to 100 feet of casing. So unfortunately, I could have saved money there, but it didn't work out that way for me. Once you get your hole down to bedrock, your casing down to bedrock, and then your hole down into the bedrock, and you eventually hit water, you hit a water vein, then the well, this hole that you drilled, the pressure of the water pushing in from the veins will actually fill up higher than the height of than the depth of the vein. So in my case, the water pushed the water up in the well up to about 54 feet below surface level. So it actually came up. I hit water at 300 feet. And I pushed up almost, around 250 feet. So the next thing you do is drop your pump down with a pipe connected to it, so it can pump the water up. So we dropped the pump down 160 feet to get it about 100 foot below the level of the water. So there's about, in the 6-inch pipe, there's about a gallon and a half of water per foot. So we got about 150 gallons, 100 feet deep. So that gives us about 150 gallons of water just sitting on top of that pump. So at any given time, I can pump that much water out. At the same time, water is going to refill what's keeping the water from going any higher is the pressure that weight of water is putting back down on the vein. So that's at that 54 foot from surface level, that's where the weight kind of pushed back and stopped the water from rising any further. So as I take water out, as it lowers, water from the vein is going to push back up to 54 feet. So it pushes back up at about 10 gallons per minute. So if I'm pumping out at about 10 gallons per minute, the level of the water will stay right around the same. So yeah, so if I was just to pump continuously at full bore at, I think the pump I got to 3/4 horse, I think it pumps out about 15 gallons a minute, somewhere around there. I'd be able to pump for quite a while before I got down to that level of 160 feet where the pump is suspended at. So a lot of my neighbors in this area have dug wells, which are grandfathered in around here, but they're becoming more and more rare because as people want to refinance and sell their homes, banks are not financing homes without a well into bedrock. So as a sole source of water, that's kind of diminishing. A dug well is basically a hole dug in the ground so you hit water. Now there is water suspended in the overburden. In my case, I have an interesting feature about 15 feet down, all the way down to bedrock. So for about 145 feet, it's basically just clay muck that's really impermeable. So what happens here is water, drains into the ground, and it gets down to that clay layer, and it just sits there. It can't really go below, or it takes a really long time. So there's always water about 15 feet down here. So if I were to put in a dug well, I would dig, a little bit deeper than 15 feet. I'd dig like 20 or 25, maybe 30 feet. And then I'd put in these concrete tiles, which are basically these big, like cylindrical blocks with a hole in the center, maybe about 3 feet tall, I think they are. Could be wrong on that. And basically you dig down, you put one of them in there, and then you backfill around it. Then you put another one on top of that one, you backfill. So what you end up with is a concrete column that goes down the full depth. And that thing fills with water from the water that's in the ground there, and you can pump it out. New York State isn't allowing you to do that anymore because they're worried about groundwater contamination, surface water contamination, and that will contaminate a dug well. In my case, so they want you to go down to bedrock because down there it takes a really long time before any kind of contamination can get down and permeate all the way into the bedrock like that. Decades and decades and decades. And probably by then, that contamination, a lot of it will have been filtered out and eaten up and things like that. So That's why they're requiring that. But people around here, they're still drinking the water from their dug wells just fine. And they probably will continue to be fine. A dug well is something that, I might do, or someone might do, if they needed more water in maybe a more remote location on their property, or just even right near their house if their well goes dry, or it seasonally goes dry, or for some reason they just want more water. Maybe they want to do irrigation and or water animals. Who knows? That's what a lot of people do that around here. So it is an option. My particular option is not going to be any more wells. It's going to be rainwater catchment, which I will get to. So after checking with all my neighbors about the depths that they had to drill and how long it took them to get to bedrock, I wanted to talk to them about quality of water. And the general consensus was in the area that a lot of people get sulfur gas in their water here, and some people get colloidal clay. So there is a lot of sulfur water in Ulster County, and there's a lot of sulfur gas in the water in the bedrock right on my street. I know a lot of people have gotten it. The general rule of thumb that people have suggested to me is go as shallow as possible into the bedrock. The people that have gone deeper are the ones that seem to have more problems. So that is why I was seriously considering a pounded well. The problem was that this whole thing is a total crapshoot. Nothing is guaranteed. This is just the opinion of the people around here, and there's no geologist that really knows. And the best information you can get is talking to well drillers in the area. And I talked to a dozen of them, and I would always ask what wells they had drilled right in my area. And a few of them had drilled in this area, and they said they kind of corroborated the same thing. They were like, yeah, they didn't really distinguish between a shallow well and a deep well. They just basically said that, probably about 50% of the wells they've done in this area have hit colloidal clay or sulfur gas. So I basically just had to say, all right, I had to make a decision. It was either I was gonna take the risk of going with a pounder and hoping I'd develop more water sooner, and also hoping that that the better water was higher in elevation in the bedrock. Or I was going to get a rotary, a drilled well, and basically have some solace in knowing, all right, I'm probably going to hit it within the first 200 to 300 feet, and it's going to cost me a lot less per foot to get down there. So basically, I figured out that a 200-foot well pounded would actually be more expensive, or right around the same expense as a drilled well down to 400 feet. And I knew there was an extremely high chance that I was going to hit water within 400 feet. The chance of the better water being shallow, in my mind, was pretty slim, just based on people's opinions, and that is not really based on a lot of scientific facts. So, being as how we're on a really tight budget, I just went for the drilling because I couldn't take the risk of it ended up costing, over $10,000 to drill this well. And in my opinion, we ended up having to go to 325 feet. If I had done that with a pounder, it would have been over $10,000 with the pump and everything. And it was super questionable if the water would have been any better or not. So I think I made the right decision going with the drill. The pounder will try to sell you on the fact that with the drilling, that slurry that they create, mixed with water slurry, they can control the water, and some shiesty well drillers will actually make that slurry thicker. They'll put less water down there, so when that compressed air blows all that slurry back up, it'll actually fill in. They say it'll fill in some of the small veins that you hit, and it will seal them up like cement, so that it takes longer to hit. You have to end up hitting a really big vein before you actually get any water in the well. So really, who knows? I think I made the right decision. If you're drilling a well and you're making the same decision, hopefully, you can take all this and make your own educated decision.